for too long. The unfortunate side effect was that many people ended up in China without any kind of...
Gabor Holch, top executive coach from Hungary, author of Dragon Suit, the go-to guy on doing business in China.
What are other ways that managers or people coming to China can really connect with China?
Well, there's lots to say about this. So first of all,
what's that one thing that you wish you'd known before coming to China?
It's a tricky question to answer. China has these ambitions of building a value-added economy, but they are lagging behind. They are still much better at...
You touched on the economy, which is a huge talking point in China right now, that it's slowing down. What's your response to that?
China is, if somebody wants a future in China, they have to look at two things.
Gabor, I read your book, The Dragon Suit. Couldn't put it down. You've encapsulated my life, I'd say, over the last 10 years, and it's a fantastic book on entering China, but also for anyone currently in China. I think it's really a fantastic read. What is a dragon suit?
A dragon suit is a person. It is an expatriate manager or executive who is not from China, but working in China on the shoestring.
Would you class yourself as a dragon suit?
No, because I wasn't sent here by a large company. So I came over to China and I started... I wouldn't even say my company, but my consulting practice. So I run a couple of small teams. In this respect, I'm not a dragon suit.
And why did you write the book?
It was an internal urge, so to speak, which is the best start for a book is always like this, when it has to kind of come out. But to be more specific, it came from my coaching practice, my executive coaching practice and my speaking practice, the two put together. So I keep going to events all over the world where they talk about China, international leadership events, investment fairs, these kind of things. When they discuss, let's say, invite me on a panel or make a speech, but I'm part of the event and they are trying to figure out China. If you're outside of China, your major relation with China is trying to figure out what the hell is happening there. And then in the meantime, I run a practice as an executive coach specialized in intercultural, as I call it, East-West leadership. And I hear so many of the answers to those questions during my coaching sessions. But the bad thing about being a coach in this situation is that you coach under very strict confidentiality rules and agreements as it is. So you cannot share what you hear as a coach. So I went back to some of my former coaching clients. I put on my writer hat. I asked them, may I interview you about the same topics? Some of them were kind enough to say yes. And that's what Dragon Suit is.
That's what I really liked about the book is it's anecdotal, but it's also backed up with clear data and statistics. And it fleshed it out quite. It was quite a nice compliment, I felt.
It is a mixture of a dream, a vision for the book and fear, to be honest with you. And I will tell you why. So the hope, the vision was to write a book that is as entertaining as some of these really fun and cool expat memoirs that just describe their journey, how little they knew about China, or it can be about Korea, Japan, or the Philippines when they arrived in the country, and then they learned and who they met and what places they saw. And some of the mishaps, obviously, I mean, that's what we learn from. But on the other hand, I didn't want to write a boring business book, and I didn't want it to be too subjective. So what I try to do is write a book about expat journeys, which is very well researched. And this is where the fear bit comes in. Because in the age of social media, if you say something and you're not right, they will tear you to pieces. And I really didn't want that. I have enough of an experience as a researcher so that I could really deal with my sources. But I wanted to make it into a narrative that makes people say exactly what you said. That it's like a story. You couldn't put it down because it's fun.
Yeah. It is very relatable, and I could see myself in certain pages and also key takeaways. I had a lot. So without giving away too much in the book, I highly recommend people to go away and actually read it. What's that one thing that a lot of companies, when they're entering China, it could be SME to MNC, what's that one thing that you wish you'd known before coming and telling companies before they come to China?
It's a tricky question to answer because China changes so much over time. So I came to China in 2002 And I lived here full time until 2022. And now I spend about half of my time in China. And one of the points I make in the book and also after the book in my speeches and articles is that very often we think if somebody spent 10 years in China as an executive, I mean, they know China. But you have to look at when they arrived and when they left, if they left. So, for example, right now, a lot of experienced China expat come back to China after a few years of break. And there is no guarantee that their experience gained from 2017 to 12 is going to be that useful. But one thing I wish I had known is how much of China's opportunity is invisible. So how much, as if you run an international business or if you come here as a private entrepreneur, how little of what you should know about China is on paper. And how much is simply in the grapevine, so to speak. And you have to go out and you have to network and you have to find people that you really trust and they trust you so that they really tell you where to look.
Can you dig into that even more? So how do you make the invisible visible? So going to networking events are great, but there can be somewhat of a formula of going to the same events. I find this in Shanghai, you see the same faces. What would be a real actionable point that is within that grapevine?
Well, I mean, you start at the entry level. You start with the very easy stuff. Is that I personally coach a lot of executives who started working with China, or if we are lucky, actually, the best way is if I start coaching somebody before they come to the country. And some of these people are actually experienced expats. They worked in Mexico before, a little bit in Singapore, then a little bit in Poland, and then they are sent to China. And then one thing that they do, which is a quintessential example of what we are talking about, is they want to know about the regulation in a certain area in China. They go online and they read about it. Or they say to their assistant, could you please find this law, translate the relevant parts into English, let me know. And then if somebody has been in China long enough, already knows the written law tells you very little about what is actually going to happen. And you have to learn this. You have to get used to this. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the longer you stay in the country, the more you figure out the nooks and crannies that you should know. But this is hard-earned knowledge. And people are not going to give that freely away at a networking event. They are a little bit, how do you say, they're not so generous with it because they learn the hard way. So that's why you have to build up something that is much smaller than a network, which is basically a kind of almost like a mastermind group around yourself with people that you treat well, that you are generous with what you know and the resources that you have. You take them out for a drink or coffee even when you don't need anything. You kind of nurture this kind of relationship. And this is, I mean, for those people among our listeners who are familiar with the China situation, this is what foreigners often confuse with what Chinese people call Guanxi.
Okay,
right?
So what's the difference? The
difference is that I went into this with a very open mind because foreigners keep talking about Guanxi and the art of Guanxi, and a lot of intercultural business programs or cross-cultural business programs that prepare foreigners for China, they talk about Guanxi as well. I found thousands of books with Guanxi in the title. But then when I sat down and started talking about this with the something like 2,000 people I interviewed for this book, I found out that the overwhelming majority of foreigners who are proud of their Guanxi skills in air quotes, they actually Guanxi with other foreigners, not with Chinese people. And it certainly has nothing to do with the traditional network concept that Chinese people call Guanxi. So this is what you have to know, is that you cannot start on paper in China. You cannot start with what's in the public domain or legal websites, or many of the books are useless as well. I mean, sorry, it's a counterproductive message from a writer. Yeah. But you must know from people who recently gained insight in person.
Would you say that magic pill, and obviously there's many of them, would be compassion with Chinese? Do you find that is one way? In the book, you talked about one of the managers they had with their staff. I think they'd had a family member pass away, and then said, "Did you want a hug?" And then later on, she said, "Sorry, I'm not right now."
Right.
And a couple of days later, she said, "Now can I have that hug?"
Right.
How do you find that balance, particularly with Chinese teams, nurturing them and find that balance with compassion, and also just linking that to your point on building relationships with Chinese instead of just the usual "let's go to KTV and drink alcohol"? What are other ways that managers or people coming to China can really connect with Chinese people?
Well, there's lots to say about this. So first of all, compassion is a word that tends to scare people because it's a huge word. It has a slightly spiritual meaning. It involves a lot of responsibility. And I would say it's not a pre-requirement. It's not something that you must have in order to succeed in China in building this kind of personal network or relationship. And partly it is, I mean, those who have read the book already, they know that I go a little bit into the methodology of coaches and how we describe behavior and how we describe intercultural behavior. So if we made compassion a prerequisite, then people with certain personalities would be in serious disadvantage because some people find it much more difficult to feel compassion towards strangers than others. But this disadvantage is not there. If we go towards business, then we have to, we tend to exchange the word compassion with empathy. So this is yet again another word, and I think now we are getting a little bit closer. But empathy towards Chinese people is again not a prerequisite because number one, managers are busy. And number two, empathy towards whom? I mean, China or individuals in your team? Now, I think what is genuinely required here is interest, curiosity, which it doesn't mean that you're particularly good at empathy or compassion. It just means you genuinely want to learn. You genuinely want to figure out what's happening. And then it doesn't look like a big requirement, but more managers than you would think fail this test for one single reason. And interestingly, in this respect, there is improvement in China, in the expatriate community in China, is that for too long, positions in China have been a promotion because China was a very lucrative market. And if you were sent to China because of the volume and the speed and the growth of the market, it could just help you to supercharge your career. You know, suddenly you find yourself, instead of an economy that grows 4 or 5%, you found yourself in an economy that grows 12%. Enormous white spaces in the market and so on. So if you manage to get yourself out of bed and get dressed, you made money. And if you were genuinely talented and diligent, then you could build stellar careers. But the unfortunate side effect was that many people ended up in China without any kind of interest in China. And that is changing now. So it's more of a requirement to speak the language. Now it's not such, the chicken that lays the golden egg. So people who have a genuine interest in the country are more likely to end up here. Also, another thing that helps is these expat bubbles. We very often say bad things about it, but actually it postpones the culture shock and it helps people to be functional in China. And very importantly, these expat bubbles, like for example, large multinational companies, special economic zones, the commercial centers of big Chinese cities, they attract Chinese people who want to live and work the foreign way. And if we put these two together, it's much easier to build empathy and curiosity towards each other because they speak the language. They are not afraid of, working the way a foreigner would. So I think this is the important thing, to have a basic level of curiosity and then accept the fact that we kind of work as expats in a culturally in-between space.
Yeah, and the students do that very well. I find when they come to China, they learn the language, they throw themselves. I did the same 10 years ago.
That's right.
I learned the language. I was Friday nights having hot pot and barbecue with Chinese. Actually, I didn't hang out in those British or foreign circles. That didn't come till much later.
Right.
So I had a bit of a reverse culture shock hanging out with the foreigners in China. So that was a bit of a thing for me. You touched on the economy, which is a huge talking point in China right now, that it's slowing down. What's your response to that, and what should the response be? There's clearly two camps right now. There's the Chinese economy is slowing, but we need to work through it. And then there's the Chinese economy is slowing, we need to migrate to other areas, whether it be Vietnam or Dubai.
Right.
So what would be your response to that?
Both, obviously. It's just simply that China is graduating from seriously, how do you say, underserviced and undersold country, where around the time when I arrived in China in 2002, I mean, people who live in China right now, they would have been quite surprised at some of the things. I mean, my first employment contract in China with a large international university included my bicycle. It was put in the contract that I'm entitled to a bicycle and which brand. And
was it a nice bicycle?
It was a very nice bicycle, but as somebody who came over to China from a job in the United Nations system, me and my friends were like, bicycle in the contract. But then we reached out to the local Chinese teachers and we talked about it in a little bit scoffingly, like I do now. And it turns out they didn't get a bicycle. And when we said which kind of bicycle it was, make them go, pew. Okay, yeah, they treat the foreign professors well. So it is very, very different now. Now, what you are supposed to do about it as somebody who runs an international business is, again, you must accept that different sectors of the economy, they grow or not grow at different speeds. And there are opportunities in some and really no opportunities in others. And what we also have to add is that the political headwinds are much stronger now. So the time in China when they carved out these special economic zones, and basically the social contract between the Chinese governments and international investors was, we will let you do whatever you want to do in those little islands of foreignness, because this is why we built it. We basically built it so that capitalist economy can thrive, shielded from a basically socialist country. The law is different, the exchange norms are different, everything else is different. And then, yes, you make money for both sides. This era is ending. So now companies must act more like local entities. This is why the Chinese government seriously pushes multinational companies to register as a local entity. They want to make the division line between foreign and non-foreign enterprise in China more porous, with lots and lots of very mixed consequences. So if I may add one of each, let's say, things that are actually great for multinational enterprises, because this way they can reach markets that they couldn't reach before, right? So, I don't know, international telecom companies, insurance agencies, banks, and so on, they were not allowed in China to serve the general population because they were foreign companies. This was the deal. And now if you register as a local entity, then you are allowed. 15 years ago, an international car brand like Tesla would have never been allowed to become as local, so to speak, as it is now. But on the other hand, some of the privileges are taken away from foreign companies and foreign individuals. So, there might be Communist Party cells in more international companies. Foreigners had privileges in terms of using the internet and lots of others. So this might change as well. And also, now if a foreigner arrives in China, they must integrate their daily lives as well, much more, starting with the language. For a very long time, it was okay not to speak a single word in Mandarin to run a large business. Here, this is going to change as well. Yeah. And the changes are just beginning.
Yeah. So, I think with the visas, you kind of have to have a level of HSK now. I think that's another... when I was doing the point system for my visa, I had a working visa.
Right.
I had to have a certain level to push me over the threshold.
Okay. I know that you get credits for it. I don't think it's a prerequisite.
Prerequisite, but it would enhance your visa application.
Right.
Who knows when you're there at the visa station, they look, oh, it's got HSK. You never know. It can play a part.
Yes. Now, this is where sometimes in the minds of people who want to come to China as investors, or they want to start up a company, or want to come here as executives of a large company, the logic can go upside down, can go a little bit topsy-turvy. Because in their head, whatever China doesn't have, China needs. but it's not necessarily like this. Just because you don't have multiple mobile phone operators in China, it doesn't mean China will need or allow multiple mobile phone operators, and lots of other different kinds of goods and services. So in this respect, with the slowing economy, then if somebody wants a future in China, they have to look at two things. Number one, the same market realities as you look at anywhere else. So what are the underserviced territories in China? What are the underserviced sectors? But also you have to look at, very simple and very well published, the 5-year plan, the current 5-year plan of the nation, and look at politically what are those areas where certain directions are welcome and what are those areas where they are not welcome. And what is very difficult sometimes for international executives to get used to is that there is no conversation on that. There is no consultation. It's just, this is the way we are going to go.
And it's interesting because comparing to Hungary or the UK, if the government was to announce, "Oh, we're going to do this," you would be doubtful whether it's actually going to get pushed through or not. Would the budgets be in place, or would they actually follow through with the manifesto? But that 5-year plan is so key. And I think that comes out a lot in the book. Is you clearly pick key actionable points that really companies need to be aware of. It's things like coming in April. I thought was a great point in the book.
Right.
Coming in April, and you're not going to get as much weather culture shock. Generally, the mood is great here. There's a lot of expos, a lot of events coming up in April. So I think that was a really great point, a shrewd point, which not a lot of people pick up on.
Well, it comes from two things. The first one is that I'm, as a consultant or advisor, as a coach, as a trainer, my job is to support the individual manager. I used to be a strategy deployment consultant. I'm not anymore. I am not an investment consultant. I'm not an organizational development consultant. I support the individual manager. Sometimes there is a clash of interests between the individual manager and the company. So this is why I'm actionable, because I'm not dealing with strategy. I'm dealing with what you are going to do tomorrow, so that you can also have a plan for next week and 2 months from now. Otherwise, if you get bogged down today, then your tomorrow and your next 2 weeks are going to be spent firefighting. So you cannot learn. You cannot use that empathy that we discussed. And then the other things is just basically repetition, because I have been in this business for 25 years now. So eventually you just notice, it's a little bit like everybody's haircut is different, but in the barbershop, you still have 15 templates on the wall. It's a little bit like this. And this thing about when expats arrive, it's just something that I interviewed one person after another, not just for the book, but for 15 years when companies asked me to go there and interview people, let's say, leadership potential and things like this. And then it suddenly occurred to me, mainly for the children's academic year, and also because summer in Europe is supposed to be, there is this dead season when everybody goes on holiday. It's a good time to move. But first of all, in Asia, it's not the same because, in Europe and North America, the summer break is based on the harvest. And in Asia, the seasons are completely different. But also, it just occurred to me, August, early September is probably the worst time to move expats, especially expats from places like Australia or North America, to a subtropical country. And you can read in the book how many people detested every single day until the weather got a little bit cooler. So this is something that HR managers might take into consideration next time.
It's a great point. Relating it to the UK and Europe, you've got Easter. It tends to fall into April, so they're using that week off.
That's right.
To come to China. So it's a really great point. You mentioned some sectors. From your experience at the moment, what are kind of 2 or 3 sectors that you see really developing in China and something to keep your eye on?
Well, if somebody is really good at tech and doesn't mind having this split personality between the Chinese digital ecosystem and the non-Chinese digital ecosystem, even if you just fly over to the Philippines and South Korea, it's a completely different thing. Then there are huge opportunities here. So there are lots of smart people and lots of smart companies I know that basically what they do is that they act as providers in these two very loosely connected or sometimes completely separated digital ecosystems, but they pick up something on the way and use them both ways. So they cross-pollinate their China and non-China businesses. And there are very specific examples. For example, BMW has done this with the technology that they build into their smart cars, right? Because in China, the requirements are completely different, especially electric cars. People usually don't drive long distance. This is one of the interesting issues. That if I buy a car in Europe, my home in Europe is in Budapest. I want to be able to drive over to Cologne or to at least to Vienna, which is very difficult with electric cars right now. But here, if you buy a car in Chongqing, probably you are going to drive it within Chongqing. However, you are going to get stuck in traffic jams much more often. So that's why they put in like a karaoke machine and a better integration with your mobile phone. Obviously, nobody cares about WeChat in Europe. So what BMW and lots of other companies did is that they learned how to build this kind of entertainment and communication system in cars. And now they started putting something similar into their Western cars as well. And obviously what they have been doing in China for the last 25 years is based on their experience outside. So that is definitely it. On the other hand, I also meet a lot of disappointed people in tech because they just take their expertise from Silicon Valley or from somewhere in Germany. They come over and then they find out a lot of it is useless because people use different tools and they are disconnected from. I talked to somebody doing artificial intelligence. And basically he says he came over to China and got disconnected from most of the databases he wanted to use. He couldn't use it in a VPN because, they wouldn't allow him. So that is services, professional services, extremely, China has these ambitions of building a value-added economy, but they are lagging behind. They are still much better at building stuff than building services. So anything from legal firms to strategy consultancies are doing quite well. You just know how to do things, how to run large-scale supply chain operations, or how to run luxury resorts and things like this. They have a big future. Renewable energy, and it's going to pick up now because this is again an interesting field where East and West fused what they can do and what they have done so far.
What's your thoughts on AI?
What's AI's thoughts on me? I don't know. Yeah. It's.
Is it helping you? Is it helping you in your
It's
business?
helping me. I am this kind of stumbling, lead-footed end user who uses ChatGPT to structure my articles and do a little bit of research and rewrite things. If you have to write something like a copy, but for a slightly different audience, I get ideas for it. But there are two things. First of all, I'm 52 now, so I'm not in the generation. Thank you very much. So I'm not the generation who would jump on it with everything we've got. If I find out that anything I do requires a deep understanding of AI tools, I'm much more likely to hire somebody who can do it for me. So this is number one. And the other thing is that actually a little bit background about me. I started it with studying languages and philosophy. So I'm really and then I went on to study international relations, diplomacy, and now I have a degree in management consulting. So from the big cloudy picture to the more specific applications. And I still really believe in personal service as a kind of high level product. You see what I mean? I love noticing that we use QR codes and face recognition at the airport now to check in and board a plane. But first class is still like an attendant per every 20 passengers. Yeah. And in my coaching and training work, that's the school of thought I'm following. So I'm not in a rush to digitize whatever I do.
Yeah. I think there'll always be a need for that personal relationship, and particularly in your service, I think that would be key. But could you have written this book using ChatGPT? Do you think?
I just hate to imagine if I could. I don't want to do it.
Right. People are using ChatGPT to write books. And
I know, and ChatGPT then reads them, and then what's the point? So I really think this way. If somebody writes for as a lead generator, right? then I can perfectly understand it. But writing is my zen. It is something that I really love doing, and I want to do it well. So actually, I already knew that I wanted to write about business, but I took a creative writing course, and my project was a novel, because I wanted to write as a good writer. I think not enough business writers are good writers. There are lots of, it doesn't matter if it's ChatGPT or not. Actually, I think for the last 20 years, a lot of business writers wrote like ChatGPT anyway, right? So there is the data, they do their research, they put in the data, and then there is this kind of start with a funny story. Jeff went into this and that meeting room, little did he know that, and then gives a big picture and gives some data and then gives some conclusions. And then So I really want to write even better books than this, which are really like a conversation with the author or somebody who's really knowledgeable about this topic.
Yeah. An English teacher in high school once told me, write what you know. And you clearly know what you're talking about when you've written this book. So where can people buy Dragon Suit?
Online. So I think can we share links
Absolutely,
with people? Yeah. So we can share an Amazon link, but we can also, I put together a page whose link we can share, where wherever you are in the world, you can pretty much just click on the logo of that online retail store, and then it takes you right to the page of the book. So online is very easy. If you want a physical book, then the only thing is this is an academic publisher, so you are unlikely to meet it at an airport. But you can find it in many places, and online is the easiest right now. Yeah. And the ebook is out.
Yeah. And where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you personally?
Well, one thing that you can do is just go on any search engine and punch in my full name, because there is only one person with this combination of first and second name and family name. And another thing is just if you look for Dragon Suit online, you are going to find a lot of cute babies in dragon suit, in Halloween costumes. But if you punch in Dragon Suit book, right, in 2 or 3 steps, you will find me online.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Gabor. Really
thank you.
I learned so much. And yeah, go out and read the book. I read it in a weekend, and I will be reading it again. It was fantastic. And I really appreciate it.
It's been a great chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And subscribe, like, and see you next time, guys.